Welcome, everyone. It's great to have you with us as we dive into a powerful revelation from the Lord. Welcome to this quick dive into the Come Follow Me lesson for DNC 91 through 17. See the link in the description for the full podcast, brought to you by the Speak Peace to My Soul channel. All right, so here's our roadmap for today. We're going to start with the keys of the kingdom, then we'll get really clear on what priesthood keys actually are. After that, we'll look at the pattern of authority, how keys work in the church and in our families, and why it's so important to follow those who lead. And of course, we'll wrap up with an invitation to really think about all of this. Okay, let's jump right in. Our study starts in Doctrine and Covenants, section 90. Now, this is a big deal because it's where the Lord gives some really specific, sacred instructions to the newly organized First Presidency. He's laying out their unique role in his kingdom right here on earth. And listen to this verse. "And this shall be your business and mission in all your lives, to preside in council and set in order all the affairs of this church and kingdom." Wow, that is a powerful divine commission, isn't it? The Lord himself is defining their mission. And notice, it's not just some corporate or administrative task. No, this is a sacred trust. It's a mission for their entire lives. So, to really grasp the significance of these keys, Elder James A. Faust shared this incredible image. He talked about being in Jerusalem and seeing these big, ornate, rusted old keys hanging on a monastery wall. But the doors they once opened were long gone. And he used that to create this beautiful contrast between those physical, temporary keys and the spiritual keys of the priesthood, which he called the keys that never rust. That metaphor, the keys that never rust, is just perfect, and it leads us right into our next section. Because to really get this, we've got to understand what priesthood keys are. And thankfully, President Dallin H. Oaks has given some wonderfully clear definitions to help us out. So here's the core definition. Priesthood keys are the authority God gives to priesthood leaders to direct, control, and govern the use of his priesthood on earth. The crucial point here is that the keys are not the priesthood itself, but the authority to direct its use. I love the analogy of a car. The priesthood is like the engine, that's the power, but the keys are what you use to start the engine and decide where the car is going to go. So, the priesthood leaders who hold keys are the ones who authorize and direct all of that power on earth. And President Oaks gives another really vital clarification here. He taught that we shouldn't refer to men as the priesthood. We sometimes say that, but the priesthood is God's divine power and authority. Men are holders of the priesthood. And that's not just semantics, it's a super important distinction. It helps us remember that the power is from God, and men are simply his authorized servants acting in his name. And this is why it all matters so much. This is why these keys are absolutely vital, because through the direction of those who hold them, incredible blessings are unlocked for every single member of the church, men, women, and children alike. We're talking about direct communication with the heavens, the ability to receive saving ordinances, the key to gaining a true knowledge of God, and even access to the ministering of angels. All of that is unlocked through these keys. Now, the restoration of these keys, it wasn't a random event. Not at all. It followed a very specific, divine, and orderly pattern. It created what we can think of as an unbroken chain of authority that stretches all the way from the Savior himself right to his prophet on the earth today. And you can see that beautiful pattern right here. It starts with Christ. He gives the keys to his chief apostles, Peter, James, and John. Then fast forward to 1829, and who shows up? Those same heavenly messengers. They return to restore those very same keys to Joseph Smith and Oliver Cowdery. And it doesn't stop there. A few years later, in the Kirtland Temple, other ancient prophets, Moses, Elias, and Elijah, they come and restore additional, very specific keys that are essential for the gathering of Israel and all of our temple work. The prophet Joseph Smith, he knew that these keys had to continue. He understood how critical this was. So before his martyrdom, he met with the quorum of the 12 apostles, and in that sacred meeting, he conferred upon them every key, every ordinance, every bit of authority that he held. He must have known his time was short. He was making sure that the authority to lead the church would not be lost, but would remain right here on the earth, resting squarely on the shoulders of the 12. And this quote from Brigham Young just captures that moment so perfectly. Think about it. After the absolute tragedy of the martyrdom, when Brigham Young, the president of the 12, hears the terrible news, what's his first inspired thought? It's not despair. It's not, what do we do now? It's relief. It's gratitude. He says, "Thank God the keys of the kingdom are here." He knew the Lord's authority was secure. The church would go on. And from that moment on, the Lord has had a simple, powerful, and divinely inspired process in place to make sure there's never any confusion about leadership. When a president of the church passes away, the first presidency is automatically dissolved. The quorum of the 12 apostles then becomes the presiding body. And then, the man who has served the longest as an apostle, the senior apostle, automatically becomes the new president. There's no election, no campaigning. It's a simple process of seniority, established by God himself to provide stability and continuity. Okay, so we've seen this perfect order at the head of the church. Now let's bring it a little closer to home. Let's look at how this very same priesthood power functions in two really key settings: the church as an institution and in our own individual families. This is a really important distinction, one that President Oakes clarified for us. In the church, right, for any ordinance or calling to be valid, it has to be authorized by the person holding the keys for that specific function. Think your bishop, your stake president, and so on up the line. But in the family, it works a bit differently. A worthy father who holds the priesthood presides in his home. He can give blessings, he can offer counsel and guidance, and he doesn't need to go ask a key holder for specific permission to do that. His authority to bless his family comes directly from the priesthood he holds. You know, once we really understand the reality of these restored keys, it leads us to a vital, very personal principle: the incredible safety and peace that comes into our lives when we choose to follow those who hold them. So let's just pause on this question for a second. Why is it so necessary to follow those who have the keys of the priesthood? Why is this principle so absolutely central to our faith and our spiritual security? Well, the scriptures and modern prophets give us a really clear way to find that answer for ourselves. The Savior himself gave us the test, didn't he? He said, "Ye shall know them by their fruits." President Oakes reminded us of this very principle. We can discern truth by looking at the results, by looking at the fruits. So let's do that. When we look at the fruits of the restored church, led by prophets and apostles who hold these priesthood keys, what do we see? Well, the fruits are pretty undeniable, aren't they? I mean, we see a church that has grown from just a tiny handful of members to a worldwide faith of over 16 million. We are literally watching the fulfillment of prophecy as Israel is gathered on both sides of the veil. We see temples dotting the entire globe, and maybe most personally, we see the incredible temporal and spiritual strength that comes into the lives of everyday members who just strive to follow prophetic counsel. All right, as we start to wrap up, let's just take a moment to review the essential truths we've talked about and really consider how they can strengthen our own personal faith. So here are the key takeaways. First, priesthood keys are the Lord's authority to direct his work here on earth. Second, those keys were restored through the prophet Joseph Smith, and they form an unbroken chain right from Jesus Christ. Third, there is a divine, orderly pattern for succession in church leadership, which gives us so much stability. And finally, following those who hold the keys brings real safety, peace, and spiritual strength into our lives. And so I'll leave you with this final question to ponder. How does knowing that these divine keys, the ones that, as Elder Faust said, never rust, will always be on the earth, how does that knowledge strengthen your personal faith in the Lord's church? This isn't just a nice idea. It's a bedrock promise from the Lord. It's his guarantee that his kingdom will never again be taken from the earth before he comes.